thing that's going to help you land your first role, at least from my experience and everything that I've seen happening, is there's like a ton of things that you can focus on early in your career, and you can kind of spread yourself thin trying to cover all of those areas. You're gonna kind of improve your chances the most if you focus on. It seems like every case study that I see inside is very similar or almost identical to something that I've already seen 15 or 20 or 50 times. That kind of brings in the biggest point for me is like,
today I'm chatting with Andrija Prelec, who is the founder and CEO of Supercharge Design, which is a company that helps designers of all levels to become better at product design. During our chat, we talk about what it takes to truly stand out in the UX industry and the most important skill to improve upon in order to land that first job. We also dig into what has changed in the landscape of the product design industry over the past few years and what that means for those who are looking to get into the field. I had a blast chatting with Andrija, and I think you're going to get a lot of value from this conversation. But before we get started, I just want to mention that 85% of you who watch my videos are currently not subscribed. And so with that, I do have a favor to ask. If you have gotten value from any of the videos that I have put up on here, it would mean a lot if you hit the subscribe button. It helps me out more than you know, and I want to be able to chat with more experts in this space. And so the more subscribers that I get, then the more experts that I can have on here, and I can share their knowledge with you. So with that being said, let's get into my chat with Andrija. What are some like high leverage things that you feel like UX designers should be working on to try to stand out?
Got it. So one thing that I've noticed in the last, I'd say like 3 years or so, especially around the time where like pandemic hit, I feel like that was probably the point where industry changed a lot from a lot of the advice that you're going to find online about like kickstarting your career. I feel like the roles that are sought after right now and the roles that were previously much more available, especially for beginners in the field, are a little bit different. So everything that I'm going to be talking about now is something that I feel it's relevant at the moment. And I'm going to tie it in with the things that maybe helped me early on in the career, but I still feel like the situation and the context that I was in like 2015 or something isn't as relevant as it was maybe like even 3 years ago. Right now, it feels a little bit different, especially because junior and beginner roles are a lot less sought after, if that makes sense. So one thing that I do still notice, and it is that thing that gives you a lot of, it allows you to basically land your first role. After you've landed your first big role, it's a lot easier for everything else. The thing that's going to help you land your first role, at least from my experience and everything that I've seen happening, is UI design. And there is kind of this big gap of, as a designer right now, we have so much responsibility for different things. You need to be strategic. You need to be a visual designer. You need to understand users. You need to build empathy. You need to understand business goals. There's like a ton of things that you can focus on early in your career, and you can kind of spread yourself thin trying to cover all of those areas. I feel like the most, you're gonna kind of improve your chances the most if you focus on UI early on and slowly try to understand everything else about the industry as you're moving forward. And there's one big reason why, and that's because UI is something that you can sell really easily. If you're a company and you work for that company as a designer, you already have something that company can sell. Or if you're working in a small startup, you have a team of other people, you're all working together on the strategy on like how you're going to approach things. But like visual design is something that not everyone else in the team has, and that can be a really good selling point early on. And there's one big reason why, and the reason for it is that UX design covers so many aspects of design and the product that you're designing. And it also impacts business a lot. So when you're really early in your field, really early in your career, you don't have a lot of experience behind you, besides maybe a couple of play projects, something that you did on the side or something like that. It's going to be really hard to earn people's trust and kind of showcase, yeah, I can handle, and like the decisions that I'm going to be making as a UX designer are going to be the right decisions. And you have to kind of earn that trust. And it's really hard as a junior that doesn't have those projects behind them. So that's why I still feel like UI is one of those skills where you can easily set yourself apart, knowing that most of the UX portfolios that I've seen from juniors end up looking exactly the same. So it's UX is not going to make you stand out, especially in a couple of those projects that you're working early on. It seems to follow like a really set of standards that your portfolio is going to have. You're going to have a persona. You maybe are going to have an empathy map. And it feels like you just did those things because you thought you had to do them, not because they had an overall impact on the project that you were working on. And that, for anyone else who is hiring, is showcasing that you maybe don't fully understand all of the processes, all of the methods, and how it's impacting the overall thing that you're doing as a designer. And you're just kind of crossing things off your checklist because you think you need to have them in your portfolio, versus really showcasing what you specifically did for that work and how it impacted all of the other future decisions and the results of that project. I know it was like a monologue of things that are important, but yeah, hopefully some of those parts are
Yeah.
making sense.
No, that does make sense. I think the thing that is always difficult for me is sort of, so I definitely see the value of working on UI design, but I wonder how to reconcile that with some UX, in the sense that in some of the interviews that I've had, and some people, like, I've just chatted with some hiring managers just to get some perspective on things that they look for. And so one of the things that they look for is to see that you have some design thinking, and to show that what is your design process and can you articulate it. So I'm curious, like, how do you work or what do you feel like is a good way to work on UI, get better at UI, but still kind of like have those UX principles in mind?
Yeah. So one thing that you're kind of really probing in as a topic with your question right now is a really important part for me. I feel like maybe the biggest thing that anyone who's listening to this can take out from this conversation is that it doesn't necessarily have to be UI that you're really focusing on. If you're showcasing the true strengths of your UX thinking in your portfolio, the reason why I'm suggesting UI as a really good starting option and a way to kind of differentiate yourself from everyone else who's entering the field is because it's really easy to measure and kind of visually compare. And it's going to be one of those things when someone is skimming through your portfolio, they're going to take a couple of seconds, maybe a minute or two if you're lucky, to kind of get a sense of who you are as a designer. It's really easy to do it with something visual. The other way to do it is through really good storytelling and kind of really good emphasis on the things that you are doing as a UX beginner that others are not doing. And it kind of ties in with the fact that everything else that you're doing when you're early on in your career needs to showcase that you understand what UX is, what you're doing as a designer, how that process is impacting everything else that's happening inside of the business, how you're bringing the results, and you kind of have to stress your strengths. And I feel like it's really hard to do those things with those templated portfolios that I that I see around with beginners. And like it seems like every case study that I see inside is very similar or almost identical to something that I've already seen 15 or 20 or 50 times. And that kind of brings in the biggest point for me is like trying to find that something that is going to set you apart and actually get you to the point where you're having those interviews and get you to the point where you have something that's really hireable right now in the way that the industry is currently. Now, to go back to your question about like how do I do it as a UI designer and how do I still showcase UX as I'm also showcasing my UI? To me, they're like so intertwined. It's really hard. It's really hard to kind of set them apart. Um, so uh, as I'm working on UI, I'm never ignoring everything else that happens that we kind of usually put into the category of UX design. But for someone who is a beginner or trying to get their foot through the door in this industry, UI seems to be this kind of surface level thing, uh, and it's just focusing on making things pretty. It's definitely not something that I would suggest. So to me, it seems like you still need to have the overall basis of your process. It needs to be based on everything that's good for the product, that's good for the users. All of those things are true. The reason why I'm mentioning UI as a way to differentiate yourself is it's because it feels easier to showcase your impact with something visual in your early portfolios versus like in those little details and the decisions that you did during your first few projects, play projects, school projects, whatever it is that got you to the point where you now have a portfolio of work behind you. um, that's why I'm kind of stressing that point. It's more about like differentiation and something that's going to make you seem very hireable versus like, yeah, really focus on UI or like take it to the next level.
Okay, that makes sense. So basically, as you're working on UI, just kind of keep UX principles in mind as you're doing it so that you can articulate your decisions if someone were to ask you about them.
Yeah, to me, as a beginner, I see a lot less availability for you as a designer if you're just a UX beginner. To me, everyone who's a UX beginner should also, at least in the early days of their career, try to get their UI to the point where it at least feels like you're doing visual hierarchy right, and like some of those elements that are making a difference, um, versus ending it on a mid fidelity prototype level, because there's going to be hundreds of other people who are at the same stage in their career as you, who are applying to the same positions, who can get to the point of mid fidelity. But if you can handle it that like one step above, which usually takes like 3, 6, 9 months of like really hands-on practice to get to the point where UI feels like, okay, yeah, this is looking good. It's following some familiar patterns. It's going to work for the platform that you're designing for. All of those things are important. Like it doesn't have to be like visually wow,
Yeah.
completely like something stunning, but it needs to be something that's going to be easy to develop, and it still looks good and it's clean and there's visual hierarchy and like the correct elements are stressed and kind of have enough contrast for them to for a regular person to just notice them as they're skimming through a portfolio, or using that product. So yeah, to me that's kind of the part. I wouldn't suggest to anyone who's entering the field to just focus solely on UI. I would so try to get as much kind of width of the industry as possible. But I would put more focus on some of the UI skills just because I feel like they're going to probably represent you better. And especially in your first few roles as a junior designer, and I'm sorry for kind of going
Yeah,
in
no,
detail
please
with some
do.
of these things.
Yeah.
Uh, you're probably going to have either a product manager, a project manager, client, someone who has the idea of something. And you might be even tasked with like, these are early balsamic mock-ups. We didn't cover all of the edge cases. We didn't think about everything, but we kind of want to take a direction like this. And it's going to be your role to expand on it. But as a junior, you're probably going to have you're going to be working more. I'm not sure if you're familiar with like the double diamond process, and
Sort
I
of,
can
yeah.
expand on it further if needed.
Yeah.
But the idea is that you're probably going to be working in that like right side of the double diamond. If you want to, I can kind of give you a brief overview of how I look at it.
Sure, I can put some B-roll of what it looks like up as you talk about it.
Awesome. So yeah, basically, like the idea of a double diamond is that you're going from like not having a clear vision of the problem to having a clear vision of the solution. So in this like first diamond that we have on the left side, you're focusing really on understanding the problem space and kind of narrowing down on one specific problem that feels like it's most impactful, feels like the right one to solve at the moment based on everything that you've learned, either through like generative research or like a lot of different strategic items that are going to be considered in this phase. And those are the parts where either it's going to be a really senior designer working on it, other research teams, or your client with their vision. Maybe they are making some of these things on assumptions. That's very possible. But you're less likely as a junior going to be focusing on this kind of strategic problem defining areas. You're more going to be focused on looking for solutions to an already defined problem. And who's going to come to you with an already defined problem? It's probably going to be either someone senior in your design team, a product or a project manager, or a client. Those are kind of most likely people who are going to come to you with a problem to solve. And then when you have that problem, let's say you're going to be tasked with designing a new feature for a chat platform. You need to introduce groups to your chat platform. So your process can, again, include some kind of a research, be it secondary research or some kind of a primary research where you're going to be talking with users to figure out like what do they expect out of a group feature. You can take a look at competitors. Again, I took an example that's hopefully familiar to a lot of people. You've seen how to create groups and kind of manage them inside of different chat platforms. And then you have to consider your specific context, like what is your messaging platform for? Is there something specific that needs to be included in this? And then you're kind of ideating, creating those wireframes, and kind of narrowing down to a solution. That's the second part of the diamond. Is kind of you have a specific problem that you're faced with. You're kind of ideating on potential solutions, and then you're narrowing down on one ideal solution for it. And I feel like junior designers and someone who's in their like first 2-3 years of their career is mostly going to be in that space of design. And I feel like a lot of the portfolios and case studies and everything that's kind of suggested for beginners is also taking elements from the first diamond. And I feel like that part might be a little bit too abstract to beginners. And also it might be too idealistic. When you're working on true projects, you have a lot of constraints, you have a lot of limitations, you have deadlines, you have things that are maybe not something that you're necessarily going to include into your case study. And a lot of beginners don't have it. Like you might not have access to 15 users to interview that are actually using a product because you're just imagining something to create a case study for. And that's perfectly fine as a beginner. But it also showcases that you might not have to have the struggles that a lot of designers do have in real projects. And all of those factors are usually missing from beginner portfolios. So again, it ties in with the fact that like you don't have realistic constraints on limitations and things like that. And you need to showcase some kind of design thinking process, something that's going to showcase you as a designer and your strengths. So to me, it feels like the easiest way to do it and the most hireable way to do it is through either really good storytelling, a really good sense of like visual hierarchy and knowing the common UI UX patterns, or through just like sole visual design, because those things can kind of make you stand out with all of those portfolios that have all those issues, just because those issues are very realistic for someone who's a beginner.
Right. I want to touch on storytelling because that's a very interesting thing. It's something that I always hear about when it comes to making like a good case study. But I feel like someone's definition of storytelling is different than another person's definition. As far as I understand it, and I want to get your take on it, is that it's really just a process of saying what you did and why you did it for kind of like each of the steps that you did. But I don't know if there's more to it beyond that. Because when I think storytelling, like, oh, I'm going to paint this beautiful picture of this process. But then when I actually go to put down on a case study, like, well, I don't know if this actually feels like a story. It just feels like I said what I did and why I did it. And then I moved on to the next thing.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, there's a couple of elements that I usually like think of when I mention a word storytelling, and it's usually like the idea behind it is like you have something to tell. What is a very efficient and like great and all-encompassing way to kind of tell it? So with things like case studies, you can consider a couple of things like who's going to be reading that. That's going to be your audience, your person who's going through your portfolio. Who's the main character? It's usually going to be you or the product that you're designing, because you're going through a journey of like from a problem to a solution, which is something that you can tie in with how usually stories are told. Like you have a character, it's a hero, they're going through some kind of a transformative journey, or just they're experiencing things around them and they have to get to a certain point. And besides just including words, it can be like really visual. To me, it comes down to the point of like who's reading it, what I want them to get out of this experience, and what are like the most crucial points that I really want to stress. And when you take those elements, you're like referencing every sentence in your case study. You're referencing every image, everything that you're putting in there to kind of expand on that idea. Like, is it serving the goals that I have with this? If not, like, how can I do it better? How can I do it more in a more engaging way? How can I get the person not to just skim through it, but kind of pause and stop and kind of take their time to digest what I'm telling. So to me, it's taking a lot of elements of like putting contrast to some elements, either through like dynamic sentences that you're going to put in there, like somewhere just to grab attention, either like breaking a certain flow that a person is going to have through reading it, through like visual elements inside that are going to again stress the point that you want them to kind of you want to get across. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's like something else to include in here. I just wanted to reference like what you said about like presenting your work. As a designer, you're going to be articulating your design decisions as you're working. And you can do it with your team. You can do it with your stakeholders, clients, whoever. But you can also do it through your case studies as well. So it's not just like about talking. It's about communicating a message in an engaging way.
Yeah.
If that's like the best way to put it.
No, that makes sense. So you mentioned like UI is really good to work on. I'm curious, what are like good functional ways to improve your UI design in sort of like an impactful way? Because I see things like daily UI and things like that. I've never really done that before, but I know some people do to work on UI. But I'm curious from your perspective, what's like a good functional way to just improve that?
Start with like copying and building a habit of looking at the products that you're using. I'm talking from a perspective of someone like I have students who are working with us in our like mentored programs. I have students that are I'm also like a teacher at a boot camp, local boot camp about like UX UI design, where in person I can see like 15, 20 people in a classroom just like working on design, and kind of I notice things that are happening often early on in your career. And it seems like we're using products, we're looking at them, but we're not really like registering what we're seeing. Like consider like what happens when you tap on something. where does it appear? How does it appear? Is something behind it like blurred now or darkened? Why does that happen? Like, try to basically build a habit of, as you're interacting with digital products, analyzing them, think about why the designer who worked on that maybe did something like it, how it overall benefited your experience as a user. Why did it communicate something to you in a way that it did, either to visuals or text or like interactions that happen on the screen, and just kind of build a habit of consciously registering what is happening when you're using a device, because those things are going to speed you up and make you a lot more efficient as a designer when you're faced with a similar problem. I feel a lot of beginners try to reinvent something that's really a common thing just because they like the possibility of, like, they feel like the creativity in design is always coming up with like new ways to do something, versus like making a really small spin on something that works in other types of products in different industries, or like something, but it's going to be really efficient for your context. And another way besides just analyzing products consciously as you're using them is, of course, like practice. But practice can only get you so far without feedback. So look for someone, like even ask people that are kind of that you know of that use a lot of digital products. Like, how does something to them seem like? If you have someone who's working in the IT industry, that's even better. Maybe they're gonna have a perspective on some of the things that you're doing. If you can find a mentor, even better. That's gonna like be a couple of steps above everything else that you're gonna hear. But like, try to find someone and like slowly build a pool of people around you that you can just like showcase something to, and kind of gain their feedback and learn from that feedback. Again, maybe your 60-year-old mom or something is not going to be the best person to ask about, like, does this feel intuitive or something like that. But just like, if you're just practicing and you're not getting any kind of feedback on the things that you're designing, it's going to take you a lot longer to get to the point where you're going to be really good at UI. So try to show it to as many people as you can, kind of gather and see for patterns in their answers, and kind of learn from there. And like, the quicker you want to get to it, the more senior people you need around you that are actually working in the industry that can give you that feedback. Use social media platforms. Again, those can also tend to be like just giving positive feedback to everything. So try to maybe stress that you're actually looking for constructive feedback.
Or they could be really harsh.
Yeah, but again, at that point, if you have like 6 people telling you, yeah, maybe this is the area to focus on, and you have one person who's just like negative about everything,
Yeah.
maybe cut out that person when
Right.
it comes to like including their feedback. But yeah, basically, try to analyze the products that you're using, practice as much as you can, and then hopefully include as much feedback as you can also in your process.
Okay. So then when I'm trying to think, like, so I'm trying to wrap this around a idea of integrating UI with like a project. So is there an idea that you have that someone can work on UI, but like in a context of building a project around it? So they're still kind of like working on UI as like a fundamental skill set to have, but then they're able to have that as like a project that they're able to put on their portfolio. So it's not just like, so you're not like working on UI in a vacuum, I guess. Like, do you have any ideas on how to implement that?
Yeah. Again, to me, UI never exists in a vacuum. To me, it's really, really hard to just like have zero idea about what the product is going to be, how it's going to work, and just like put a facade on it or something. So to me, for everyone who's a beginner, I would still like really focus on solving problems in a very specific context for a very specific audience. But I would try to kind of take it a step further to kind of my solutions not end in some kind of a mid to high fidelity stage depending on where you are, but trying to really like polish what you have on that screen. Try to be consistent with all of your design decisions. Try to kind of include that. But one part about your question about like having a specific project to work on, to me, one exciting way to do it is to take an existing product that already has visual guidelines and maybe build a feature for it. One thing that I do hate when I see like beginner portfolios is beginner portfolios that end up like, oh, I redesigned this feature and I made it a ton better. Really? Like you did it better than like a team of 20 designers working for, I don't know, Spotify, who tested it with probably hundreds of people and who have a lot of data that they worked with. Those seem like really harsh and kind of far-fetched
Right.
from reality to for me to take them seriously. But maybe like if you take something like a Spotify, I'm sure that you have an idea for like a feature that is missing for you specifically, and try to find like 5 to 10 other people who maybe have a similar pain point and kind of learn from that and maybe build an extension. Like this is going to be a different feature in an existing product, because besides just showcasing some kind of research skills and your UX thinking and kind of the UX process as a whole, you can also showcase UI skills in a form that that shows that you can follow guidelines. As a beginner, you might be working in a team. That team might already have a design system in place. So if you can showcase that you can actually follow their spacing system, their iconography style that they're using, like, and you're not introducing a new illustration style into this just because of the sake of like you wanting to add something different to it, that can also showcase a lot of UI skills. And to me, that would be a really good case study piece that I can kind of. You're not presenting as that I'm redesigning and making something better than like this entire company has been like doing, which again you might be able to do, but it's so low on the probability scale, that it feels like it's probably more natural to do something like I'm just thinking of like if Spotify had more social media elements to it, how would I include it into the homepage? And then like, oh, so you're taking homepage, you analyze the style that they have for the homepage, and you're kind of looking for areas where you can introduce an element or two that are going to bring this new extension of a feature to. But you're also consistently applying their style. I can look at like if they're using strokes, like are you following like the guidelines that they've set for themselves? Like how well you're doing that, because that also showcases me that you're very attentive to detail, and you're kind of following the rules that a certain platform or product has. So that's one way to create a case study that focuses on UI, but doesn't. It makes it a little bit more tangible in a sense, because like you're already working with some constraints, and what we love to see in case studies is like actual constraints, something that is realistic.
Yeah. No, that makes sense though, as far as like designing something new, a new feature for an app versus just like redesigning something that's already there. I have seen advice to do that, and I sort of had that same thought. I'm like, well, I assume that this has been user tested with a ton of people, so it would just be an assumption if I like just redesign this, like, oh, I think I should go here instead. So the new feature
Yeah,
thing makes a lot of sense because maybe then you can even user test that with people and see what they, if that's something that they would be interested in as well.
yeah. Especially like you can look at the pool of people that you have available to you, and like realistically, I don't know. You have friends, you have maybe some family members or someone that you can kind of take a look at and like what apps are they using, whether they're struggling with, and maybe instead of like presenting your case study as this would be ideal inclusion for this product, it could be like I kind of spin it around and the target audience is just like this one very specific person. But for that one very specific purpose, I really solved the problem and I made something that they would use. And it's still following a design process. It's still including a lot of UX, especially because it's not you who are the user. You didn't decide on the feature, but it's someone else. But it's just like a smaller pool of people. And that showcases that you can apply the same process and thinking and kind of methodology to a bigger audience base, and kind of it's something that I can actually use and see and kind of, oh yeah, this seems like you understand what UX is, you understand how to like follow the process to get to the point of design solution, and you know how to tell me what you did and why you did it.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about, I think I heard you mention that you do some mentoring at a in-person UX boot camp. So obviously those are everywhere now, online UX boot camps. What's your take on it? There seem to be everywhere. It seems to be like the entry point to, getting into this field, or at least that's what they say. So what's sort of your take on it?
The people who have the biggest success are people who also work a lot outside of the, let's say, expected hours. Are people who have either like spent a lot of their time already exploring the industry. The people that have the least amount of success, which I feel like is going to be the majority of people in these programs, are people who expect that after like 200, 300 hours, or like however long the program is, that you're going to be like this revolutionary person that everyone is going to be fighting to hire you. And I feel like a lot of the programs that I've seen give you enough of a foundation for you to be able to kind of explore all of those elements of design on your own, and kind of go into more depth with all of them. But again, at that point, you're already kind of left on your own, and you have to be the one who's responsible for doing that. To me, it seems like all of the portfolios that get out of it, not all, but like a big majority of it, it's really easy to identify. It's really easy to understand that there's like, it feels like a little factory of like someone producing a certain type of designers. And to me, to really stand out in the field, you need to go a lot deeper than a lot of these programs offer. And it's the same thing with the program that I'm kind of mentoring other lecturers for, and I'm also mentoring students for. But I'm really open about explaining that. Right now I'm in the process of like reworking the entire program from like the ground up, and like creating all of the slides and presentations and tasks that they're going to be doing. And you want to make it as practical as possible, but you also want people to understand that there is not like this cookie cutter process that you're following. Every project is different. And like the biggest thing that you need to showcase as a designer, as a beginner, is that you understand the industry enough to be able to make some decisions on the spot that are going to be good for the context you're in, and for the constraints that you're kind of faced with. Like, okay, you might have just 2 weeks to do something. What is something that is doable within that time frame? How can you apply the design process that you learned to that? And how can you come out with something that's going to be hitting some of the goals that you had for these projects? Might not be everything that you're able to do within a time frame limitation, or a budgetary one, or like whatever it is. But one thing that you can't do is expect to be able to do like, oh, I'm going to have research, and then I'm going to go and wireframe, and then I'm going to go test it, and then I'm going to go wireframe again. It's going to be a little bit more high fidelity, and then I'm going to prototype it, and then I'm going to test it again, and then I'm going to go to the visual. Like that, it doesn't work like it. Like design is not a waterfall type of project that you're working on. So to me, the better you can explain that you understand the methods and the processes, and you know when to apply some and when to ignore some, that's kind of the biggest thing that makes you hireable.
Right.
But it's also the hardest thing to figure out, because you don't have the experience of making all of those decisions continuously, and it's really hard with bootcamp programs and things like that to simulate it. So to me, there's like this big gap of like what you might be taught in a bootcamp versus what is expected from you, and your sole purpose for this couple of months or like a year or however you're going to be in that program is to bridge that gap. And that's something that you're going to have to either find a really good mentor that you trust. Maybe it's going to be your teacher, maybe it's going to be like someone else that's going to really push you there, um, or it's going to be like you're really left on your own to try to figure it out. But hopefully, at least this advice gives you something to focus on and kind of understand that there's this gap that needs bridging.
Right. Cool. The last thing that I wanted to touch on, you mentioned that the industry when you started is different. It was different then than it is now. How is it different than when you started versus what it is now?
Got it. So I remember like one of my first portfolios, it was like plus graphic designer. That was kind of the way that I represented what I'm doing. And at that point, I'm not sure if I even understood like the big difference behind what UX is, what UI is, what product design is, like all of these terms that we've kind of built in the industry. So I'm really kind of lucky about the fact that I happened to kind of stumble upon this industry at the time where I did. Just because at that point it was still kind of developing. Yeah, there were some norms with what you were doing and how it was working, but I don't think it was as set as stone as it might seem right now. That's one big difference. And the other difference is I feel like a lot of people at that point, if you had a graphic design background, if you had any kind of visual skill set or psychology or any kind of background that would allow you to maybe transition into a role of a UX designer, it would be easier for you to kind of have a chance to do it, because at that point it seemed like the job positions are just like starting to open up. 3 or 4 years ago, like a year or two before the pandemic, it felt like if you had like 1 year of experience, it was really easy for you to get like a promotion in a different company and a promotion to a different company. And now we're left with a lot of head of design folk or like super senior designers, where like I'm interviewing someone who has like 5 or like 7 years of experience, and they're like fundamentally their experience is very tied to like one or two or three types of projects that they worked on, that I don't feel confident that I would put them as a senior, not like a level above that. So it also feels like there was this period right before the pandemic where there were so many opportunities, and one of the reasons why so many boot camps like started opening up is because there was so many opportunities for like getting a job in UX. And I feel like right now we've all noticed that happened in the industry, and we're kind of it slowed down in a sense that I don't see a lot of junior roles opening up. So a lot of people who are maybe a senior in one role might be able to land a mid-level job in a different, better opportunity for whatever reason. But all of the people who are junior are gonna kind of have a harder time filling that role in a sense. What I'm trying to say is, I feel like if you're mid plus level, it's really easy in the industry. Everything below that, it's really, really hard. And it's really frustrating to see that there is a lot of people with a lot of potential, but there's going to be someone on the mid level who wants to take on that role or that project, that it's going to be really hard for you to sell yourself as like the better option and like the choice to kind of pick. So I feel like that's kind of how the industry evolved, like low to mid level of opportunities to really high. And now it's kind of slowing down and getting to the point where it's kind of manageable to have enough new people come into the industry and enough roles that feel like all the needs. And it's one of the reasons why it's really frustrating to be a junior in this industry at the moment, because
True.
you really need to be able to stand out.
I can attest to that. Man, I tell you, I look at LinkedIn and other places like that, and a lot of them will tell you how many people have applied to these jobs or whatever. And some of them are like in the thousands. I'm like, holy shit. Like, it's nuts to see how many people apply to these roles, and the ratio of that to openings is very sparse. So yeah, but I guess that's where you talked about where you can set yourself apart by, if you have that higher UI skill set, that's at least something that can make you stand out amongst a sea of other people that maybe don't have that.
Exactly. And again, it doesn't have to be UI. From my experience, it seems to be the one that's clicking the most, just because
Sure.
like the person who's screaming through a portfolio already is looking for certain things and that they want to see. And I feel like that's the easiest way to wow someone. But it can be anything else. It can be like really the way that you're presenting yourself, a little cute details that can make you like set you apart, be it just something that showcases that this is something that you've done, and it's not something that is like 20 other things that I've seen in the last half an hour when I was skimming through portfolios and applications. But yeah, if I'm relating this to the boot camps that I've been teaching in, that a lot of like my mentee lecturers are also doing. I would say that if I have like 20 people in my class, I would say like 2 to 3 of them have enough work ethic and also enough of a background and like a lot of the skills that they kind of build up with time for them to be able to land the role in the, let's say, 6 to 12 months after the program. A lot of the other folk are either going to know that maybe this is not for them, like usually 5 to 6 to 10 people even like understand that, yeah, now that I know everything about this industry that I need to know as a beginner, it's not really for me. And then there's going to be like this 7 to 8 people. I'm not sure if my math is mathing, but like 7 to 8 people who are going to be kind of struggling, trying to get a couple of steps above to be actually hireable. And knowing that there is so many competition happening also, that's kind of lowering their chances as well. So they can get discouraged, but it might have taken them just like 3 more months of practice to actually get to the hireable point. And also for them to be the opportunity that's right for them. So it's not
pushing
just
forward.
on the person, it's also about the state of the industry at the moment. So like you can work your you know what off trying to get to the point to really be hireable, and you can be, but maybe there's just like the place where you're looking jobs, if it's not global and you're like stuck to your location or something, there's a lot of different factors. So it's not just you, but you are the only thing that you can really impact. So like try to work on those things and kind of get yourself to the point where we're showcasing everything and it's kind of bulletproof in a sense. So
Yeah.
when an opportunity opens up, you can really take it.
All right. Well, cool. I appreciate you chatting with me, Andrija. Can you talk about where people can learn more about you and sort of how you are helping designers these days?
Yeah, I can. Thanks for giving the opportunity to do this as well, and thank you for having me today in here,
Yeah.
chatting about design. Again, this is a topic that I can spend hours talking about. So, in the future, if you ever want me to join you again, just let me know.
I appreciate that.
But yeah, I'm a co-founder of Supercharge Design. Um, at the point where we started, like, we noticed that there was a lot of designers on Instagram, so that's kind of the place where we got the most popular on. And the way that we approached, like, what we were doing is we have experience in design, a lot of experience. We have a lot of experience in teaching in person, and we wanted to see, like, if there is a way to kind of scale it and offer a similar level of like what we do during mentoring sessions, what we notice that a lot of beginners struggle with, and kind of create products around those things. And for us, it ended up evolving through, like, different attempts of, like, trying to find something that works and that can help on that level, where it's maybe not so much one-on-one, even though it's something that you can also get with us. It ended up being, like, smaller video courses that are very specific about certain topics within design, that can take you from, like, just learning about those things to really, like, practical tips on how to apply them. And I'm not sure. I'm really like, I know that you took a couple of them. I don't know how far you got with them, but basically the idea is that you're starting off with like the basics of a certain skill, and you're kind of slowly building it up towards mastery. Again, mastery is something that's going to take not months, but sometimes even years. But the idea behind this course is that you can get all of the tips in a really condensed format, everything that you need to kind of keep in mind as you're making design decisions. And with time, you're going to be better at kind of remembering all those things and applying them to your work. So through video lessons, through practical assignments, through a lot of these different things, the idea is that you're kind of slowly building that mastery, and you always have a reference point to go back to when you're struggling with something. So, like, be it contrast in color, be it picking two or three typefaces to kind of combine for a particular project. Like, all of those things are some elements that we cover in our courses that are right now focused on UI. Again, it comes back to, we know our audience are mostly beginners. We know our audience are mostly people who are in their, like, first 2-3 years of career, and the design tasks that those people are usually kind of tasked with are things that are connected to UI. Again, through everything that we are talking about UI, we're also including how it relates to UX, but it's more focused on UI right now. In the next year or two, our focus is probably going to shift on those topics that are more UX related, just to have, again, covering as much of the industry as possible in a really niche format of, like, oh, a colors course, a typography course, a user interview course, or something that might pop up in the future. But it's like a really specific topic within the breadth of the industry that exists.
Yeah, that's actually how I found you. So I don't really use Instagram, so I didn't even know. So I didn't know much about before this, but I actually found that typography was one of the things that I struggled with a lot. And there's really not courses about that, interestingly enough. And so I legitimately, like, looked it up I just typed in, like, I forget what I typed, typography UI course or something like that. And then I stumbled upon your course that wasn't even out yet at the time. It was about to be released. And that's how I kind of got into the Supercharge design world. But I think it's really neat that you do have those more specific areas of interest, because that's sort of what I wanted is like that. And then the colors class, I mean, basically read my mind there. I'm like, I don't know how the fuck I'm supposed to pick these colors. like, I don't know. So yeah, I appreciate that you sort of have that. I mean, I know you have like the big Figma class, and I think you just released like a UI foundations, but I think it's really cool that you have the sort of those more specific courses as well.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that and how you stumbled upon us. But as I've said, like, we're following a similar process to what we do in design is something that we followed with how we built Supercharge. So it's like we realize like the pain points that you're having, it's very common. Like, I'm sure if you've talked with people who were in your boot camp, or like what are some of the things that they struggle with, a lot of them would mention similar things. It feels like you're left with vague tips on like how to pick colors or typography or something like that. And you have to just like do it enough times to the point where you feel confident in it. The idea behind our courses is that you don't have to do it a lot of times. You kind of can go through a more structured process of maybe just like learning some practical tips of how to apply it. And typography, honestly, is one of the skills where I see like UI gurus on the internet. When I look at their like files or like their posts or like something, you can see like those typography mistakes that are like, how after like 5 year designing, or you presenting yourself as someone with 5 years experience, how can you still get typography so wrong, which is such a fundamental skill for any kind of designer. Doesn't have to be UI designer, but like, even if you're someone who goes to the mid fidelity point, you should still be able to work with paragraph spacing, line character spacing, like all of those little items that make such a big difference with someone who's reading. And like 90% of a product or like a screen you're designing is going to be filled with text. So typography and color, like imagery, working with like illustrations, all of those things are really crucial for someone early in their career, and also in all of the years after that.
Sweet. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I'll put a link to Supercharge Design, all your social links in the description below. So if anyone wants to check that out, definitely feel free. But again, thank you for coming on. This has been great. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. It was fun chatting about it. Sorry for like making some of my responses so long, but there's so much context that I want to share about around some of those things. So I hope it's not too much for your viewers, and thank you for having me and for including those links. Honestly, that's a big plus.
Absolutely. No problem.
I hope you enjoyed this chat with Andrija, and if you did like it, then definitely hit the subscribe button. And if you are interested, you may also enjoy this video here. So feel free to check that out as well. And until next time, I will see you in the next video. Take care.